Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Friend Show. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer, today joined by Chris Patterson. Chris, how are you doing?
I'm doing good, and yourself?
Yeah, not too bad. I'm much better that it is A, Friday, and B, almost December, which means that we are very, very close to the end of the year and the sweet, sweet, wonderful December holidays. We are also joined today by Marius Roodt. Marius, how are you?
Right on you. How's it going,
Yeah,
Chris?
yeah, not too bad. All right, let us get into the first news story of today. And this is about South Africa's Reserve Bank and its warning about a major threat to the financial system. South Africa's central bank has warned that the country's crumbling infrastructure, especially its water systems and transport networks, pose a significant threat to the financial system. The Reserve Bank said on Thursday in its biannual financial stability review that, quote, sustained deterioration in critical infrastructure poses a direct operational risk that could disrupt the functioning of the financial system. While electricity availability appears to be gradually returning to historical trends, other critical infrastructure, such as the supply and quality of water, as well as transport infrastructure, especially rail, port, and road networks, continues to degrade. This comes as Joburg is continuing to suffer from its water crisis, with Johannesburg's water entity saying that it's thinking of raising water restrictions on residents if consumption keeps climbing. Level 1 water restrictions, which is basically you can't use hose pipes during the sunlight hours, have been in place since September. And Joburg Water says the city has a daily average consumption of 1,750 megaliters, which will be reduced by Rand Water to 1,600 megaliters a day from December 1st. This is and will be continue to be reduced as things go forward. He said that this would create a gap which Joburg Water would have to plug. Now, Joburg says that it is doing a number of, quote, aggressive interventions, including permanent reduction of water supply to prepaid and deep consumption areas, which they say is already in place, scheduled water restrictions, which have been implemented since November 8th, repairs and maintenance implemented to, quote, improve turnaround times from 48 hours to 24. Yeah, if they think they're fixing water leaks in 48 hours currently, that is fantasy. But anyway, intensifying work on pressure reducing valves, which are used to lower system pressure. And also intensifying disconnections from people who have illegally tapped into the water network and are not paying for it. They say that they highlight efforts by the city to cut off people's illegal connections in the Deep South region, which are where they've faced significant resistance in attempts to cut off illegal connections. But I think that this is a little bit of misdirection. I suspect that the main problem here continues to be the state of the city's water infrastructure rather than simply people stealing water or Rand Water not supplying enough. Now, there are some problems with the whole water system. The Lesotho Highlands Water Project has not been completed on time, and so there isn't enough water available for the municipalities here. But Joburg, I think in particular, is underselling the state to which its municipal infrastructure is decayed and the extent to which this is really a city problem. In fact, they kind of seem to almost be saying, no, it's you dang residents for using too much water. And while the focus is on non-paying customers, who definitely make up a significant proportion of people who are, they've messed with their water meters or they've just illegally connected to the water grid. It does seem, I think, that a lot of the problem here really lies with the city's failure to maintain the infrastructure. Chris, what do you make of the Reserve Bank's warning? I mean, this is kind of one of those things where just as we may perhaps be on the horizon seeing some positive economic policy reforms, which could start boosting growth, still yet to be decided, but that seems to be the direction we're heading in at the moment.
Yeah.
We have a new threat, and just as load shedding is disappearing into the distance, we have a new threat which seems to be hitting our economic heartland of the country in Gauteng. What do you make of this story, Chris?
Well, National Treasury, first of all, says that basic infrastructure forms the foundation for economic growth. So if you don't get infrastructure right, then you're not going to get economic growth. I recall watching a video of business owners there in Gauteng complaining about their lack of access to water. Even small hair salons that need to push out their appointments because they don't have access to water. So automatically their bills are going to be affected, and it's sort of a knock-on effect that just creates chaos.
Yeah, exactly. And, the less water you're able to sell, it's very similar to the problems that we had with ESCOM and electricity sales, which is that the less water you're able to sell and the more you jack up the prices, people either start using stuff illegally or they try to reduce their water consumption, or richer people will get like boreholes and water catchment things. And then you find that, we don't have any money to replace the system. So it becomes a sort of vicious cycle of self-reinforcing decay. Marius, what do you make of this story? Do you agree with my assessment that I think Joburg is kind of trying to pass the buck a little bit here and make this an everyone problem when it's more a them problem?
It definitely seems so, especially they're saying it's the fault of residents who aren't saving water. And look, people probably could do a little bit better with saving water. You often see people watering their garden or washing their car, in the middle of the day. And, before there are even water issues, you normally get told that's not when you should be doing that kind of thing. But from the work we've done, it seems, Joburg, Chris could remind me maybe, but I think Joburg's non-revenue water is something about like 40%. So that's 40% of the water that Joburg gets, it can't even charge for because it's losing it in leaks or whatever the case is. And all just comes down to maintenance. And, it's like anything, the same as it's like your car. If you don't take it for its annual service or whatever the case is, eventually 2 or 3 years later, the engine's going to explode. And instead of just having to fork out the 2 or 3,000 rand a year for your service, you have to fork out now 20 or 30,000 rand to fix your engine or to buy a whole new car. It's a bit of a silly example, but I think it holds because that's exactly what's happening in Joburg and Ekurhuleni and actually most of the rest of the country. People just simply aren't maintaining infrastructure, whether that's roads, whether it's water, whether it's electricity, and then you have much bigger problems down the line because people just aren't doing the small things that need to be done constantly, and just making sure that things are getting patched up and working and replacing what needs to be replaced when it does need to be replaced. But you don't do that, and then eventually you have a big problem. And a lot of it's, I think, it's bad planning. It's also trying to save money. Apparently, that was one of the problems why we did get big problems with ESCOM, because ESCOM executives were getting bonuses for the more profit the ESCOM made, and obviously maintenance is a cost. So ESCOM executives and managers and so on were deciding not to maintain what they needed to maintain, because then they would get bigger bonuses because ESCOM would have a bigger profit at the end of the year. But obviously, we all know what happened with that because things weren't maintained. Then we had these various load shedding issues and so on. So yeah, it's obviously a big problem. It also just shows you how if you don't like these very complex systems, if you don't make sure they're all working, you get big problems down the line. So the Reserve Bank is warning that our financial system is at risk because we're not maintaining water infrastructure, and all these things they're extremely complex. They're all interconnected, and you often, it's that whole chaos theory. What's the name example where if a butterfly flaps its wings in China, that causes a hurricane in Florida, or whatever the case is. And this is actually similar. That says if something breaks down somewhere, it has all these other cascading effects which I can't necessarily predict. And this is, I think, one of those cases.
So, Chris, we are doing our part with the launch of an app.
Yes.
Yes, another app. But would you want to tell us a little bit about that?
So we've developed an app where you or anybody can download the app and sign in, create an account, sign in, and from there it asks you for your email address, your problem. First of all, there's a list of 8 issues you can choose from. Then you can take photos or videos, upload it, and that will be sent to the relevant municipality. Currently it's only in Gauteng, so that will go directly to a municipal manager, for example, and hopefully with collective pressure we'll be able to force these municipalities to start delivering services.
Right, and also the hope is that this is part of documenting the scale of the problem, which is often quite difficult, even for I think city administrations to get a handle on, because people don't report things, because uh, uh, the infrastructure is pretty large, and a lot of the systems for collecting information I think don't work as well as they should. Marius, any final thoughts on this? By the way, the name of the app is the hashtag WhatSACanBe app, and there will be a link to it in the comments below. But Marius, do you have any final thoughts?
Not really, or just to say that if we have very big problems with water in Joburg and Gauteng, that's going to have serious consequences for South Africa overall. Joburg and Gauteng are still the industrial and economic heartland of South Africa, and it's been, I mean, it was where Joburg is was actually a pretty bad place to build a big city, because it does have problems with, it's not a very wet place. But obviously, I mean, the city developed there because of gold and so on, and it's a bit late to move it now. But yeah, I mean, these are problems that we definitely need to solve. And it's going to be, if we don't solve them, it's going to have serious consequences for the country as a whole. And never mind the people who actually live in Joburg and,
Right.
all just the kind of frustrations. Load shedding is one thing, but, you just get your little lamp and you can read your book or get your inverter or whatever, and you can carry on watching TV. If you have water shedding, you've got big problems, unless you've got a pool or something, or if you can afford a JoJo
No.
tank. A lot of people can't, so.
No, exactly right. And I think load shedding is instructive in that if you just make some proper changes to the system, to the maintenance, to these kind of things, that you can actually see quite a bit of progress, especially if consumers are doing their part as well, as happened with load shedding, where lots of people made alternative plans to get around to the electricity grid. So, I suspect with the right plans, this problem can begin to be alleviated relatively quickly. Okay, let's go on to our next story. We talked a bit on the show a while ago about these spate of children dying, allegedly being poisoned by bad food they ate at spaza shops. The link to a lot of spaza shops was never properly established, as far as I can work out. But there was an interesting opinion piece from Andrea Rother, who's a professor at the University of Cape Town and the head of the Environmental Health Division, explaining this issue of children dying from pesticides more in depth. And basically, the way she tells it, this is a far larger issue than simply bad health standards at shops, and that actually this is a problem where due to the many decades of poor sanitation infrastructure, overcrowding, all these sort of things, and particularly in South Africa's townships, you've had unsanitary conditions that create room for pests, rats, cockroaches, etc. But I think rats is probably the one that people are most concerned about. This has resulted in the widespread use of ever more powerful pesticides and poisons, often sold illegally to people who then use them to try and keep pests away from their stuff. These are organophosphates, carbamates, and pyrethioids. Apologies for my pronunciation. So she says, my research found that they were being sold by informal vendors in markets and at taxi ranks on trains. The pesticides were being acquired from agricultural cooperatives, garden shops, and middlemen. She says that it was only after the national outrage was sparked by the tragic deaths of 6 children in Naledi, Soweto, after they'd eaten snacks from an informal shop, that this issue started to get the attention that it has needed for nearly 20 years. She says that the children who died in Naledi and Soweto had died from tubofos, which is a highly toxic organophosphate pesticide legally sold in South Africa, but only for agricultural use. She said that a year ago in 2023, 2 forensic toxicologists and I published a paper showing that out of 50 children whose cause of death was examined with toxicology tests in one mortuary, 29 had died from tubofos. She goes on to basically say that while this pesticide is legal in South Africa, it is classified by the World Health Organization as an extremely hazardous pesticide, and that it's basically banned in the European Union from any use at all, although there's some export that's allowed. It's also banned in Angola, the Comores, the DRC, Madagascar, Malawi, Mauritius, Mozambique, Namibia, the Seychelles, Tanzania, Zambia, and Botswana is actually banning it as of the 1st of December. It's also been a restricted pesticide in South Africa since the end of 2023, but people still continue to use it because it is so effective. What's interesting is that Agriculture Minister John Steenhuisen did say that based off of the packaging of the tuberfos that they had found while looking into these poisoning deaths, they had recovered it. They found that definitely it looked like the stuff was imported and was not produced locally in South Africa. I mean, we don't know whether that's a general statement or just a specific case at which they found. But Marius, let me start with you. I think that this is one of the keys to the story is that I suspect a lot more children have been dying from poisoning for a while, and it only took kind of a sort of a social media furor before people started paying attention to this issue. And this is really a result of a governance failure in a lot of ways. It began with the creation of the townships during apartheid, but it's continued into the democratic era with insufficient sanitation, insufficient refuse collection, all those kind of things, allowing pests to grow out of control. And as a result, people are using chemicals which they probably shouldn't be to get rid of cockroaches, bugs, rats, etc. What do you make of this story?
Yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to say. It's a breakdown in governance and regulations and laws not being enforced and so on. Reading that story, it says people are just decanting pesticides into ordinary bottles and selling them and what have you. I'm sure that's not allowed at all. And I'm sure it's not allowed in any country. Just like decant dangerous pesticides and then sell them and what have you. And if laws and regulations were enforced, they wouldn't be happening. And also, as you say, the issue of townships and shanty towns, you can't really blame somebody who's coming from whatever deep rural Eastern Cape or KwaZulu-Natal to the city because they're looking for economic opportunities and so on. And what there's no housing for them, so they're going to build a shack and that. You can't really blame somebody like that. They're looking for opportunities. But the government needs to be able to have housing for people. It doesn't have to be government approved housing, but there needs to be a way that low cost housing is built for people that they can pay for, whatever the case is. And there's ways we can look at providing that, because squatter camps are obviously not great places to live. I mean, we have these problems of pests and so on. They're also quite dangerous places. And also, I mean, I just don't think probably a shack is just probably a pretty unpleasant place just to, have to keep your stuff and to live in and so on. So yeah, this all comes down to governance failures and government making wrong decisions. And now, as usual, they're doing all these weird, silly things, saying no foreigners allowed to own a spaza shop or whatever, or declaring a state of emergency or whatever nonsense they've said now because of this. And I mean, why is this a state? Like, then you could declare a state of emergency for almost anything. Like, more people get murdered every day in South Africa than die from pesticides or from spaza shop poisonings. Should that mean we need to declare a state of emergency for crime? Probably some people would say we do need to, but that's a different discussion. Yeah, but it's again one of these things where it comes down to complex systems and you're not managing them properly, and then you have all these other kinds of breakdowns and you have consequences that you can't even predict.
Right. Chris, zooming out, I think in a lot of ways, this is really one of those things that has been caused very directly by the fact that we have so much poverty in South Africa and that we have people who have not been able to improve their living conditions for many years. If there was more money around, if the people didn't have to, as Marius said, live in shacks, all these sort of things, if there were more job opportunities, if there was just more wealth in the country in general, we wouldn't have people feeling like they needed to or living in squalid conditions like this, or feeling like they needed to resort to using dangerous chemicals to keep pests out of their environments. What do you make of this story?
The government would be there to help those people combat those situations. I recall from reading that the demand for housing in the city of Cape Town is far higher than the amount of people arriving to Cape Town is actually far higher than the amount of housing that the city can provide. And the city has a list of informal settlements that they provide services to. So there's so many people coming into the city of Cape Town every month that they can't keep track of how much services need to be delivered. And from there, you see protests, riots for services, and the people feel helpless. So they move to options or solutions that they think work, and the municipalities just simply can't keep up.
Exactly. This is, if people had more resources to do things for themselves, they would also be less reliant, I think, on governance. And also, you find generally that when your society gets wealthier, when your middle class grows, that the middle class is the most effective segment of society, often at holding government to account. Because they have some sort of financial independence and sort of stability that allows them to engage in politics in a much more, I think, targeted and focused way. Marius, well, obviously, there's definitely law enforcement stuff that can be done to try and solve this problem. They can crack down, they can do education programs to warn people about how dangerous some of these pesticides are. I think that we're not going to get rid of this problem until we see a major changes in South Africa's society. I don't know. Is that too glum?
No, I agree with you. And like we're saying, you can't blame somebody for living in a shack, and you can't blame somebody for, trying to get whatever, buying this dodgy pesticide because they've got rats and cockroaches and all kinds of weird things running around. People are going to try and make where they stay fairly, uh, fairly livable, and that's one way. And one way people can do it, and until they can live in, there's opportunities for people to live in better conditions and better, more formal housing, where you're going to see this kind of thing. And until also people have access to resources where they can, pay a proper pet, not pet, a pest company like Rent-A-Kill or whatever the case is to come in and sort your house out, then they're going to go for these kinds of, do-it-yourself solutions. Because I would imagine, for Rent-A-Kill to come into your house to get rid of a whole bunch of pests is whatever, 1,000, 2,000 rand. A lot of people living in a shack obviously don't have that kind of money, and they'd rather buy the 50 rand bottle of dodgy pesticide from a vendor on the side of the road.
Exactly. Okay, let's go now to our neighbor, Namibia, who are in the middle of holding an election. Well, they were supposed to have been done by now, but some voting stations will remain open until Saturday because of complaints lodged with the Electoral Commission of Namibia. This has voting was delayed in a bunch of places, and there was a lot of, I think, criticism of the just general mismanagement of the voting process. The opposition in Namibia has claimed that this is an attempt to subvert the electoral process. There are, I think, 36 polling stations that are going to remain open on Friday and Saturday in response to the criticism. They had all supposed to be closed by 9 o'clock on Wednesday. All sorts of problems have hit the voting, shortage of ballot papers. The turnout was higher than expected. Overheating of tablets used to verify voters, which sounds very similar to what happened in South Africa's most recent election. Torches used to show up invisible ink ran out of batteries. Sometimes the voting staff left early. The main opposition, the Patriots for Change Party, has called for a halt to the process. They said, quote, "We have reason to believe that the Electoral Commission of Namibia is deliberately suppressing votes and trying to frustrate voters from casting their vote." One of the current opposition leaders said that the Electoral Commission had taken this country to a precipice, and they think they can help it with 2 more days. The tiny Namibian economic freedom fighters said they wanted the vote annulled, and saying that the election process was not free. There's been some speculation that the high turnout in the vote is not very good news for SWAPO, who have governed the country since its independence in the 90s. Marius, there's been some speculation that Namibia may see a change in government after this election. It's difficult to know because there isn't a huge amount of data, polling, that kind of stuff about Namibia. It's a small, out-of-the-way country for the most part. What do you think of those suggestions to begin with? And secondly, what do you think of these delays to the process? Do you think that there's something we should be worried about here?
Look, as you say, not much polling's been done in Namibia, but across the world, incumbents have done pretty poorly. And there's a lot of speculation that Namibia would, that SWAPO, the governing party there, would come under 50%. Just looking at the results that have come in so far, Namibia is different from South Africa. They also have a proportional representation system like we do to vote for parliament, but they vote directly for their president. So they actually had 2 elections on Wednesday, one for parliament and one for the president. And on the presidential vote now, the SWAPO candidate, she's actually just very slightly above 50%. She's on 50.6%. If she got less than 50% of the votes, would have to go to a runoff. But in the parliamentary vote, SWAPO is on 47%. And the IPC, the party you mentioned, they're coming second with 20%. Quite interesting. People who follow American politics would also be pleased to know that a party called the Republican Party is going to get a seat in parliament. They always get seats every now and again in Namibian elections. So they're going to be there. So I'm sure Donald Trump will be quite pleased that there's another Republican Party that's going to be in the Namibian parliament. So yeah, it's all quite hard to say without polling, but what's coming through, it seems what you can expect. I mean, and this is a big drop for SWAPO. If they finish on 46% or whatever it is for parliament, that's a drop of 20 percentage points from the last election. And that election, so they got 65% in 2019. That was I think the only time, or the first time in a post-independence Namibian election that SWAPO got less than 70% of the vote. And before that, there was no talk of rigging or anything dodgy. SWAPO was getting 70%, above 70% of the vote, fair and square. So, but now this is obviously, this is all very concerning. And there have been warnings that the Electoral Commission wasn't prepared. Somebody I know in Namibia who is quite clued up on this kind of stuff says he doesn't think this is malicious. He thinks this is more likely due to incompetence. But who knows? And there's also been talk that ZANU-PF and SWAPO have been talking to each other, and that ZANU-PF might have been teaching SWAPO some tricks, which is also apparently what happened in Mozambique with the recent election there, where Frelimo probably almost certainly stole that election, where, I mean, they got 70% of the vote, which is almost impossible for a party that's been in power for 50 years to still get 70% of the vote in a free election. So overall, this is all, it's hard to give you a solid answer on it, but it's pretty concerning that parties are saying that that they're not going to accept the results and so on. I mean, that's one of the things that makes democracy work, is when the losers accept the result. And if the losers aren't accepting the result, then you start seeing instability and problems. Even here in South Africa, since the end of apartheid, even the EFF has accepted the results. It's only been MK who hasn't done it. And even we all knew they weren't really being serious. And we also know MK doesn't live on the same universe as the rest of us. They're in like some weird cloud cuckoo land. So, but anyway, yeah. So it's all pretty concerning what's happening in Namibia, and hopefully they sort it out. But also, yeah, they obviously just didn't plan properly, I think. And the fact that they're still voting 3 days later, it tells you that somebody made a big bugger up there, I think.
So Chris, it really seems as though Southern Africa is undergoing a major political change at the moment. Mozambique is embroiled now in chaos because of that election, which is, as Marius pointed out, very likely had irregularities in it. Botswana had the ruling party of many decades just utterly wiped out all of a sudden in an election. It looks like Namibia is going to have a seismic shift. And then, of course, in South Africa, we've had the ANC losing its majority as well. I guess, in a sense, all eyes might be on Zimbabwe as to whether something might start happening there, although, it's difficult to say because it's such an unfree society. But what do you make of this story?
Well, voters are sort of realizing their power. We've seen it in South Africa. We've seen it in Botswana. Things can change if you go out to vote. But if you have organizations that frustrate democracy by their incompetence, then things are going to get very difficult going forward.
Marius,
Nick, I just want to make so somebody in the comments here, Sean Gunter, says, how on earth can a country run if the president is not from the ruling party? It's actually pretty common for when around the world where a president will be from a different party from the party that controls parliament. The US is a good example. It happens often in the US that the president, say, may be a Democrat, and then the Senate and the House will be controlled by the Republicans, or vice versa. Bill Clinton had to deal with that. I think George Bush had to as well, where
I
the
think
House and the Senate were Democrats and
Argentina
Bush was a Republican.
is also an
Yeah,
example of
Argentina.
that currently.
Exactly. France as well. Macron's party, what's it called? Advance or something in English. It did pretty poorly in the last parliamentary elections, but he's still the president. So it's all pretty common. And that was one of the speculations that was going to happen in Namibia, where you'd have a president not from SWAPO and still have SWAPO in charge of parliament. So it just depends on how your system is run. Yeah, so it's definitely not something that's impossible, and not something that you need to raise eyebrows at. But overall, I think Namibia is something to keep an eye out on. And just there's also I think there's still a couple of elections still to go this year. Ireland is voting today, the Republic of Ireland, and I think Ghana is also having a presidential election early next month, I think. So yeah, still, if you're a politics nerd, all still quite a lot to look forward to for this year.
Indeed, and I think also Germany is having snap elections early next year. I think in end of January. I may not be remembering that date.
Yeah, maybe March. Yeah, I don't know, but they're probably going to be elections.
It's fairly early in the year because of the collapse of the government of Otto Scholz.
And that's also quite
consequential.
I mean, that doesn't happen often in Germany. Normally, their coalitions are pretty stable, so that's also quite something hasn't happened often in post-war Germany. So lots of things are changing in the world at the moment.
Yes. Okay, well, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for listening to the show. We hope you all have a wonderful weekend. The show will be ending for the year on Wednesday next week. I think will be our last episode of the year. We're going to have a couple of specials, though, between now and then, so keep an eye out for those. And with that, I hope you all have a wonderful weekend, and Waza December. Cheers, everyone.